Camera. One and two, right?
Yeah, I'm going.
Sound?
Perfect.
Good deal. You ready?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So why don't you introduce yourself and
Sure.
we'll go from there.
Sure. So my name is Jaipal Tuttle, and I guess I'm a friend of Dave's, and we've kind of a relatively short friendship, but one that's gone quite far, quite fast, and there's kind of an interesting story behind it that I'm happy to talk about.
Awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about you first, just
Sure.
briefly. Let's give a little bit of background, where you're from, and kind of how you ended up in this part of the world with the
Yeah,
family.
so it's actually, as with all things, complicated story, but, the fast version is from California, from the States. Lived all over in the States. In the 90s, I had a job that kind of took me back and forth between New York and Japan. And that kind of on the way back home from Japan to New York, I could kind of stop anywhere in the world. I stopped in Saigon in 1998, and I was just absolutely blown away. It was the most interesting, fascinating place I'd ever been in my life, and I decided not to leave. So I rearranged my life and figured out how to live here, and that was something like 17, 18 years ago. I've left and come back a few times, but my love for Vietnam is just, it's as intense now as it was when I first stepped off the airplane in 1998.
Cool. When did you meet Dave? You can talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So, interestingly, I found that Dave had started a Facebook group called Saigon Punk Rockers, right? And so I had this tremendous affinity to it because I've been involved in music almost my entire life. And he and I just communicated a few times and realized we had so much in common with each other that it was almost kind of startling how parallel our lives were, not only with regard to music, but also our time in Vietnam and Southeast Asia and the kind of things we'd experienced in life. And it also became very quickly apparent to us that we had this tremendous opportunity to kind of leverage off of each other's skill sets to create what we've now, I guess, branded Punk in Vietnam, which is kind of going to be a fun thing, I guess.
So let's talk about punk in Vietnam.
Sure. So, I guess to me, the concept of punk goes well beyond just music. It's really just, all-encompassing of music, art, fashion, attitude, right? It's something that in the West we've had decades of experience with already, right? Here in Vietnam, it's incredibly opportune. I mean, here we're living in a country of roughly 90 million people that have only had full unrestricted access to the internet for something like, a handful of years, 3-4 years. So there's this incredible amount of knowledge that's flowing into the country very rapidly. And the youth of this country, right, the kids who are in their late teens and their 20s, are absorbing this information so quickly, right? And there's this thirst and this hunger for expressing themselves. And to me, in my mind, there's no better medium to express yourself than through art, through fashion, through music. And what I want to offer, kind of the youth of Vietnam is my experience over the past, 35 years or so, being surrounded by punk rock art, punk rock fashion, punk rock music. And I want to be able to give that to the Vietnamese kids and see how they run with it. I mean, for me, I already kind of feel like I'm old and I got to do my stuff in life, but I want to see 20-year-old Vietnamese kids run with fashion, run with art, run with music, and flourish with it, right? It's something that they have the energy for. They have the energy to express themselves. They have the energy to express themselves politically. They have the energy to express themselves in ways that just a few years ago they couldn't. And they didn't even know they had the opportunity to until the internet was basically unblocked here.
So, I mean, that brings up an interesting point, though, because like punk rock music, a big portion of it, or at least the part that the Westerners are most, I guess, familiar with, is kind of it's born out of economic depression due to political oppression.
Yeah.
And it's an attitude of subversion and
Yeah.
dissidence. So how does that conflate with
Yeah. So
you
what's interesting is I think I'm kind of less inclined to be driving that aspect of it. I mean, I don't really want to get involved in people's lives and tell them how to think politically. I mean, that's for them to think about. For me, it's all about expression, right? And I love seeing, particularly kids, express themselves in ways that say, there's something deep inside of me that I want to get out, and I'm going to use art to get it out for the world to see. I'm going to use fashion to get it out. I'm going to, my haircut, whatever, the clothes I wear, if I'm making my own clothes, the clothes that I make, the music that they play, right? I mean, to me, that's what I want to see them flourish with. I'm kind of less interested in trying to tell them what to do politically. They're on their own with that one.
Which is the whole point of punk rock
Yeah,
music,
exactly.
right?
Exactly. I mean, there's some people who are obviously gravitated towards the political expression, and others who are gravitated just towards the art. For me, I think I've always been more gravitated towards the art.
I think the only people, I mean, tell me how you feel about this, and we can talk about it, and you can expand on it.
Sure.
I don't want to hear me talk ever, so let's just set it up and say that, a lot of the music that we love, that we talked about earlier, that we love, and a lot of the music that really these kids are going to find out about. I mean, if they're listening to your stuff, that's going to bring them backwards, and they're gonna discover the Sex Pistols. You know what I mean? Music born in England in economic depression and what was going on with fascism there, kind of in the Thatcher era. I mean, like the pre-Thatcher era. It's like, it's interesting, but it's only really kind of unique to them.
Yeah.
So you can kind of remove the political, connotation of it and say, hey, when this isn't relevant to you, when the storyline isn't relevant to you of what they're fighting against, but just the idea that they're expressing themselves, like, is that kind of the zone that you want to be in? And
what's funny is, to me, I'm more interested in just seeing them have fun. One thing that's so fascinating is, because it's been such a short period of time that really this generation of kids in Vietnam have now had this kind of unrestricted access to the internet. They're just learning about the entirety of rock and roll history. I mean, we've had decades to absorb everything from Elvis and the Beatles and the Sex Pistols and everything up to whatever the most modern stuff is right now. I don't even know, Maroon 5 or I'm trying to pull names out of the thin air because I don't listen to that stuff. But we've had decades to absorb and process the history of rock and all of the kind of fun that happened with rock and dancing and all that kind of stuff. And here, they're trying to understand all of that with only a few years to process it. I mean, we got to process it in real time for them. They're trying to understand the entirety of rock history in such a short period. So they can't possibly grasp everything that's happened out there. And one thing I see them really gravitating towards is kind of the grunge movement. So I'll meet a lot of Vietnamese kids who know quite a bit about Nirvana, for example, but they have no idea how Nirvana got to even exist in the first place. They'll know a lot about Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, and stuff like that. So I mean, they've really got their 90s knowledge dialed, and in their bands they've got their 90s guitar tones dialed, and they sound great. I love that stuff. I mean, I'm super thrilled to go hear them play that stuff, but there's so much more. It's like I want to be able to teach them about 80s music, late 70s music, and the different styles, and how people danced and how people had a great time. I mean, I've always just at heart been a super romantic, right? And I just love when I see people being able to express themselves with music and dancing and fun and night clubbing and having a great time.
So would you say that, like, I mean, try to kind of explain to me the punk in Vietnam thing in terms of how, like, is it sort of a blanket kind of historical template of saying, like, hey, we're presenting you with the history of punk rock music, kind of like?
In a way, I mean, it's multifaceted because in one way we're trying to kind of curate a Facebook page that people are posting kind of their favorite punk rock songs from any genre and any era. So we want to have this like large database, if you will, that people can just go and click through and hear, songs that maybe they would never have found on their own. So we have, quite a number of songs in there. And there's also then segments that are devoted to design and clothing and making really just kind of everything from kind of simple grassroots screen printed t-shirts to the stuff that I find really interesting, which is kind of high-end leather fashion. I've always just been fascinated by incredibly ornate leather jackets with beautiful paintings on them and studs and that kind of stuff. And so it just spans the gamut of punk rock music, punk rock fashion, and artwork too. I mean, I love artwork and love making artwork and trying to teach kids about kind of kind of more do-it-yourself artwork and screen printing and stenciling and making stickers and sticker bombing stuff and spray painting with people's permission, of course.
So your son Max, who I met, he had the Clash shirt on. He had